My name is Mara Webster. I'm the co-founder and head of programming at In Creative Company, and please join me in welcoming today's guests. We are joined today by the wonderful actor and executive producer Kate Winslet, actors Andrea Riseborough and Guillaume Gallienne, showrunner, executive producer, and writer Will Tracy, and directors and executive producers Stephen Frears and Jessica Hobbs.
Hello.
God, it's amazing, the sort of combination of actual and virtual.
Yeah.
A whole new thing.
I love it. Well, Will, I wanted to start by talking about the genesis of this series for you, because I love that for fun, you love reading stories and books and memoirs and biographies of world leaders. And I was interested in how that led to the genesis of creating a fictionalized country, a fictionalized leader, and particularly because you've done it in a way where it's not mirrored after one particular country or one particular leader. It's really, a much broader exploration.
Yeah, it began reading one of the many comfort reads that I read about oppressive regimes, a book called The Emperor by Kapuscinski, which is about the last days of Haile Selassie, the last emperor of Ethiopia. And really what the germ of the idea wasn't about Selassie, but about the book is kind of told in a sort of through oral history way, through servants and functionaries who worked in his palace. And you're kind of just brought through his day, when he would wake up, what he'd eat for breakfast, how he would dress, who would dress him. And it just seemed for me a good precinct for a show I hadn't seen before, almost like an upstairs, downstairs, or a Downton Abbey, but instead of an English manor house, it's an autocrat's palace. And that was just it, really, I kind of had an idea for a setting. And then more research followed from that, and then more thinking about where this country would be, where it would be located, also where it would be fixed geopolitically, but kind of between East and West, where they look behind them and they can see China and Russia, and they look ahead and they can see NATO and the Western powers, and they feel somehow betwixt the two. And like they're not really at the big kids' table of hegemonic superpower politics. And that seemed like an interesting place to begin.
Yeah, I love that. And Kate, with you, there's so many complex facets to this character and trying to figure out how to play her. But I love that you said that the scenes where she's talking to the body of her dead father were kind of the initial window into figuring out how you were going to play her. And those scenes are so great because there's no mask in those moments. We really see all of who she is. And so how did you work with those scenes at the beginning to start figuring out who Elena was going to be to you?
I love the fact that you say trying to figure out how to play her. That was very much the angst-ridden part of the process. Well, we were all very lucky as actors because when we were sent the scripts, we were sent the entire of everything that Will and his team had so brilliantly put together, and it was so intact in terms of the universe that these people came from. And that helped enormously because it meant that the tone of it was absolutely established right away. And so we all understood exactly what was going to be required of us as actors. And that was a lot of invention. We were going to have the freedom to speak the way we chose to speak based on the fact that it is an imagined place in a country somewhere in Central Europe, as Will said. And it was important that we lent into the absurdist side of that. But what I needed to do was just to get really fucking brave, actually, and talk immediately about the fact that I was very hesitant to sound anything like myself, for the main reason that there was a red flag in that for me, because the show was originally called The Palace, and we've had many shows in quite recent decades about recreations of real historical events to do with the British monarchy. And if you call a show The Palace and you put me in that role and people know how I sound in real life, even though I very rarely use my own accent, I was worried that the audience might spend the whole of the first and if not part of the second episode trying to come to understand exactly where they were. So I knew for the penny to drop quickly, I had to come up with something else. And you're right, I lent right into the scenes with her father because for a person to have kept the corpse of their deceased parent and go and have chats with them downstairs, I knew that was not a safe emotional place in which that person existed. So that then gave me the space to explore her backstory. And then with Will and Stephen and Jess, we talked a lot about, well, what if I did something that was the manifestation of her emotional self? And that was when we worked with the idea of her physically being certain ways with other people, dressing in occasionally quite grotesque, overtly sexual ways, and speaking differently. It was all part of that same thing. So that was a very long answer, but it was it was quite a long process. So yeah.
And Andrea, I mean, I love how much your character is just driven and motivated by her love for her son, Oscar, but she's in this very complicated situation where a world leader wants to selectively co-parent him at the same time. And so when you were reading the script, how did you figure out what you wanted Agnes's relationship to Elena to be, given that they have that extra layer beyond just boss and co-worker?
Great question. It was actually quite a slow process. Again, quite a slow. I'll not talk for too long, but it was quite a slow process in the sense that Kate and I were working on a film that she produced, Lee, and
brilliant film, by the way.
We'd sort of had a few tentative conversations about what that relationship might look like, and at the time, I just played. I played a character going through chemotherapy, so I had a shaved head, and we talked a lot about how perhaps that was Elena's doing, because she was unable through her own insecurity to kind of face Agnes's motherhood and fertility and youth in some sense, although they're kind of the same age. And so that was kind of something that we talked on very early on, but really didn't share. I'm sharing it now with quite a lot of people, but didn't share with anybody. But the idea that she'd stripped Agnes of her hair and her motherhood was this awful usurpation, which was just felt very painful. But what I love most about their relationship is that in so many ways, Agnes she represents the working people outside of the palace whose lives are being so tortuously controlled by these decisions inside of this political bubble they have no control over, by people who have no experience of what it's like to live outside of that. And so the contrast between them is just heartbreaking.
And Guillaume, you have such a brilliant genesis story to his marriage in terms of he was married with kids before, and then he was told, no, we're going to get married instead. And he's never seen his previous family since. So when you read a detail like that in the first script, how did that give you a lot of the foundation?
Can I just say, watching that speech that you give at the banquet last night for the second or third time, fuck, it's hysterical. And you are brilliant, Guillaume. It is so brilliant, that speech. It is amazing.
Well, it was great to do because he's such a wally, and at the same time, you can't underestimate him because he's the only one who's not scared of her. So he can speak the truth, and she knows that, and he knows she knows. But at the same time, he's still walking on eggs. But it was great because he kind of justifies himself, saying, I haven't seen him since, and it's like, what a wally. But I thought it was really funny to do. The consort being always one step behind and, thinking that he doesn't control anything, but he feels he does. And he's a bit of a lazy bum as well. Very pompous, but I like him a lot. Well, I like the relationship because you can see there are many layers in their relationship. I mean, they've been together for 15 years. They've had ups and downs, and and he knows that she can be a bit crazy, but it's like, I know her, I can deal with her. We'll see how he does.
And Jessica, I mean, you've come from directing episodes on a show like The Crown and having that opportunity to explore the impact of that level of pressure and personal relationships that also have to be navigated politically. And I was interested in the insights that gave you in coming into a show like this, which is obviously approaching it from a very different angle and perspective and tone. But were there kind of foundational insights that helped you with?
This felt like a gift. It was totally liberating. I read the scripts and just thought, oh, yes. In response to doing 3 seasons of The Crown, which I'd loved, this was just this like anarchic playpen. And to do it with Kate and with what Will and Stephen were doing, it was just this brilliant opportunity. You could kind of subvert everything you'd been so careful to get right. So I just loved that.
So great. And Stephen, I've heard that you were describing that the writing gave you so much on this as a director that it was very much like you could just feel instinctively and in the moment of shooting scenes if something was working. And I was just interested in the experience of having writing that gives you that experience as a director.
Well, if the writing's good, you're okay. A lot of it was written in this building. So if there are cold tingles going down my spine, that's why. A lot of it we wrote in this building. But it was always meant to be funny and serious at the same time.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I turned up to meet Will and Frank, I was humming the music from Duck Soup. So I knew the Marx Brothers were in there somewhere.
I mean, I love that point of it being funny and serious at the same time. And Will, you basically didn't want to set about thinking, I'm writing a satire. And it feels like the comedy comes from the honesty and the truthfulness of these characters. And so how did you find that writing the characters quite seriously in their own perspectives actually creates a lot of comedy for a show like this?
Yeah, to me, the comedy or absurdity of the piece is kind of built into the world because she's so extreme. And because she has basically unlimited material access, unlimited power, and so she creates her own reality. And when someone creates their own reality who's that powerful and that dangerous, everyone around her has to pretend that her reality is reality and the sky is green and 2 + 2 = elephant. And that is inherently funny, that people have to continue down that path with her. It's almost would be difficult for me to write the very earnest, serious version of that. And also, but it's also, we have to be careful not to be too playful with it because of the underlying seriousness of the subject matter. And also it is kind of the tragedy of the character too. And that she, I think, has something in common with a lot of authoritarian figures, is that when they first arrive on the scene, there's something very off about many of them. They look a little funny, they sound a little funny, and people might even laugh at them when they first arrive. But they take those idiosyncrasies and make them into they weaponize them, and then they become even more powerful, but they never forget they used to laugh at me. And I think that Elena, deep down and maybe hardwired by her father, believes on some level that they're still laughing at me. I'm not taken seriously. I want to be heard, and I want to be a serious figure. And it's sort of one of the broken, heartbreaking, if you want to have your heart broken by someone like that, qualities of the character.
And it's such a great point that there's two realities at every moment in the show, because there's the reality that exists and then there's Elena's reality. So when you were working with the scripts, how would you set about kind of going through each scene and looking at what's happening, but also what is her perspective and what does she believe is actually happening in this moment?
Well, we were given this extraordinary story that constantly peeked behind the curtain. So actually, even if she is giving a speech and talking to her people, actually we always have the opportunity of seeing what's behind the curtain, even if it's seeing her feet under the desk, which is typically not something that you would see of a politician when they're giving a public address. We always had that insight. So for us all as actors, we could constantly access, I mean, that's Agnes's entire universe is, racing down corridors and trying to get from A to B as efficiently as possible, hopefully without being seen. And that's the same in many ways for Elena, sneakily doing things. Everything about her is, as you said before, that sort of mask of who she is. And it was just important for us to lean into the harsh reality of that and how much she was trying to hide the entire time about her true self. Whenever she says, do I look nice? Yes, I look nice. She answers the question for herself. She doesn't wait for an answer. Nikki, do I look nice? Thank you. Yes. And then out the door, off they go. She doesn't, because she's hot-wired herself not to need, because she never got what she needed when she was young. So she's just done it. And that's how she has survived. And it was just a heck of a lot of fun to play. But as Will says, we had to be very careful that we didn't just do a funny or create a voice or do a gimmick. Because of course, when you're doing something that is sharply and cleverly funny like that, you have to play it for reality. And of course, there are these much bigger themes, and there is our geopolitical backdrop, and people will take from that whatever they do. But also the love story, this unexpected, twisted, extraordinarily, weirdly beautiful love story between these two social misfits who come crashing together and become obsessed with one another. There's something phenomenally touching about Elena and Zubak together. And Matthias and I, and it is a huge sadness that he's not here because he's just life and soul and so brilliant. But the two of us together with Jess and Stephen, we really had to make sure that we were finding a rhythm and an energy for them that was both intriguing as well as bizarre. And that was quite the balance, you know, because you have to have the audience stay with them to the last and not quite know what's going to happen. And in order to do that, you've just got to keep them held. And so we all worked on that. Like that was just a constant source of, okay, hang on a second. And there were times when I would say, I remember saying to Jess at one point, can I just do something funny? And she'd go, oh, go on then. So we'd always have it up our sleeve.
And I mean, for you, Andrea and Guillaume, I mean, there's so much wonderful comedy that comes from both of your performances with his earnestness and just the matter-of-fact stress that she's under. And I was just interested in kind of like how you found that approach to how you wanted to play with the tone and how you wanted to play with those comedic elements.
I think I'm dreadful at answering questions like this because I always have this sort of mind plop between action and cut. So I have no idea what happens in those moments. But I think what felt wonderful is to come into work and feel in every way like you were part of an extraordinary theatrical company. And it was such a joy every morning. I mean, it was, playing Agnes was pretty miserable. Thanks, Will. in all of the understandable and best ways, but it was also glorious because we were surrounded by such an incredible level of talent, and a lot of theatre actors as well, which was wonderful. And that was it was a joy.
Yeah, I agree. But also, what was great is all the sets. They're so fabulous and big and luxurious and absurd. The absurdity came a lot from the seriousness and also the fact of our routine. You know, like, for example, just having, breakfast and in this 500 square meter dining room, all in gold, and, just caring about how the eggs are cooked and, just this routine in these fabulous sets. And that helped a lot to... We just had to be, just banal kind of sometimes, but for me, and also reacting to exactly what Andrea just said about this theatre company. It's true, we were all together, like really like a company. It was great, and sometimes Stephen would, we would have so much laugh with Kate that Stephen would just go. That we say, yeah, we got the hand, because Stephen would just go, calm down a little and keep it down a little. And so we got the hand sometimes, but we really had a laugh. It was brilliant.
It's a way to process the horror as well. I mean, it's the letting off steam was so essential. Because it was hysterically funny and it paralleled something that is present in life, but it's also a way that we cope in life so often. It's through that kind of hysterical laughter. With Agnes, it's all internalized and she's just trying to blend into the wall.
We did have, just to share, we did have a couple of moments when things would happen that were so funny that people had to be sent out. So when we were shooting episode 5, Elena and Zubak having sex, and she's screaming at him, no biting, no biting. 2 people had to be sent out for laughing. One of them was Alvin Kutchler, our cinematographer,
who's a repeat offender.
He was a repeat, yeah. And one of the hair and makeup people, which was actually kind of a problem because Matthias had all these tattoos that he was getting sweatier and sweatier, and they just kept sort of rubbing off on parts of my body. And I was like, okay, this is really, like I've got, the newspaper printed on me. Yeah, but they had to be sent out. That would happen. Yeah, that happened a lot.
I mean, Will, did you find that as the episodes progressed, that you were kind of able to look at the comedic side of it differently? Because the more that the tension and the pressure increases, the more funny certain things become. You know, we have Elena singing a musical number in episode 1, which is brilliant. But by the time she's singing Santa Baby in a later episode, while there's missiles that you can hear on the outside, that's a whole nother level of it.
Yeah, it's, as the show goes on, I felt you can get away with a little bit more in some of the later episodes because we know the world well. So we now know how big the pressures are, and the world is kind of closing in on this jewel box, and that kind of causes everyone to double down on some very interesting behaviors. Yeah, but also, you know, it allowed us kind of in those later episodes to the rug kind of gets pulled on the show a little bit because all of our characters in a way are forced to confront that world outside the bubble that they've been trying to pretend in some way doesn't exist, or they've been trying to color in a different way. And now kind of, especially Elena gets to sort of see the fruits of her labor, if you will, of the world she's made. Yeah.
And speaking of musical numbers, Stephen and Kate, I wanted to ask you about the genesis of If You Leave Me Now, because it's so brilliant the way that, you know, she can hold enough of a tune. She's just not singing the right notes. And then you've got the spoken word. But in recording it in Abbey Road, I think you tried to sing it dutifully to begin with and then realized there was more to play with if you did it the way that we see it on screen. So I was just interested in how you kind of found that path to the version that we see on screen.
Mr. Frears, over to you.
If you look on YouTube, under Putin, there's a moment when he sings Blueberry Hill. And various Hollywood actors applaud him. And Depardieu is there, I remember. I mean, it's just breathtaking. So, and he doesn't sing it as well as Fats Domino. Easy.
And for you?
Well, we turned up at Abbey Road and can I just say it's a really difficult song to sing. I mean, it's just so tricky. But I had practiced and the kids were getting sick of me practicing. And I sort of thought, okay, I can sing it fairly well and with a certain degree of confidence, you know, I'll just give it a go. So I sang it. It was a space not dissimilar to this one, but without the seats. And there's a big glass sort of recording box up like that. And I see Stephen standing there and I finish and he just goes, and I was like, okay. And I'm going like this, what? And then he walks to the door, but there's then some quite dramatic steps that come down. And he sort of comes halfway down the steps and he said, I just don't understand. It doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. Why is she singing it well? I said, I don't know, because it's in the script. And he said, do it badly. And I thought, oh my God, that is brilliant. Because then, of course, in that moment, as an audience, you know, you are allowed to laugh. And it sets the tone for the entire show. And thank God. And it was very funny to do, I have to say. Guillaume and I were absolutely wetting ourselves. Oh my God. Wetting
ourselves. It was very, very funny. Especially you added all this dialogue. I mean, you just improvised and you started going bananas with, you know, it was like, what is wrong with her? I was there. It was very, very funny.
I think she's quite good in the first bit before the bridge.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
You're good.
But that's great. It's great to give her a chance and boom.
Yeah. Once it gets to the bridge, it goes off the rails a bit. But before that, I think it's good.
Just please, God, let there be an album.
Jess kept saying we need to do Elena's greatest hits, you know,
with videos.
Oh my God, there's lots of those, lots and lots.
I mean, Will, would you play around with, like, in the writer's room and on set, the different levels of, like, how enthusiastic is everyone going to be towards her reality? Because when she performs that song, you know, arguably it's a performance that deserves a polite applause, like, good on you for getting up there, but she's getting a full-on standing ovation.
Well, I also think probably in reality in some of these regimes, there is a bit of a cognitive dissonance in those rooms where people, I think, maybe I'm guilty of this too, because a lot of the song I think is quite good. And so maybe a lot of people in that room really think, no, this is great. And if you look at Zubak's face when we hang on him, and it's actually during the period where she's sort of singing the worst, he's quite entranced by it. I think I don't think he hears a bum note in there. I think he thinks she's an angel, you know.
And Jessica and Stephen, I love the specificity of the visual language and the way that you've used different angles of camera, different uses of close-up, and it's cohesive throughout the series, but there's always new elements in each episode. And so how did the two of you work together to collaborate and come up with what you wanted the visual language of the series to be?
Oh. I'm hopeless at this. Shoot what looks right.
He's really not.
It's not right what we were doing.
Yes, Stephen has an unbelievably good instinct for tone and
It's all largely instinctive.
Yeah.
Done without a great deal of thought. And I had very, very the German Alvin. And a wonderful man called Alice, who was the operator, and a very good second operator. It got sorted out. It was very, very
well,
spontaneous.
all the elements came together, didn't they? Because the design, Cave Quinn's design and Consolata's costumes, and Alvin was very engaged, and Al, with the humour of the piece and how far we could push it. And that was really interesting. So we decided to do that with the angles and the lenses that we were using, just to push it. And as the story goes along, it actually gets slightly more real and more dark. And we tried to reflect that in the cinematography and the way we were approaching it.
What's wrong with that one?
It wasn't working.
Oh. It's the hearing that's the problem, not the speaking.
And Will, Jessica and Stephen, I also wanted to ask about the locations and building out the palace, because you had a mix of different real locations like the Schönbrunn Palace and then you would kind of like digitally add towers onto it, and then some of the interiors were also filmed in studios. So how did you set about using a mix of real locations and studios to build out the vastness of it all?
Well, you sound as though we invented the wheel, but in fact, that's how films get made. You shoot on location, you do other bits in the studios, and they, on a good day, they match. I said, let's go to Vienna. There's lots of palaces there. So we turned up in Vienna, and they gave us, they were so generous, though I think they asked a high price. But they were very, very generous and gave us these fantastic palaces. Everywhere, in fact, in Vienna, except the balcony from which Hitler spoke on the one night he spent in Vienna. So that was forbidden. So that, of course, immediately became irresistible. But the palaces were simply wonderful. I suppose that Versailles is better, but these are the greatest palaces in Europe. We should be so lucky. And then we had to match them. So we went to an English town in the north called Rotherham, rather implausibly, where there are more Baroque rooms in a large house. And then we built bits. Yeah. But that's it's absolutely page one of filmmaking.
It's amazing, though, because the palace is made up of probably 30 different locations, and we shot it over 6 months. So there were times when Kate and Matthias would walk out of one door and then 5 months later walk through another. And we'd like, okay, just have to remember where we were, because we were shooting 6 episodes concurrently. It was very challenging for the cast. I thought you guys look at Andrea's face. It was very challenging for the cast.
Well, because I was opening and closing all the bloody doors. And I was a servant. So I was following somebody with an air, purifier.
Then at the end, you would add towers and bits and, very clever people would do it. The truth is, it all began with the palace that Ceausescu built in Romania. And it somehow graduated from that, which was done at various times.
He just kept building on.
Yes, he would just add more and more. And that's where it began. And then it morphed into whatever it is we've got via Middle Europe. It went via Middle Europe.
And Andrea, with Agnes as well, we get to see her loyalty being potentially tested when she's offered the opportunity to leave with Oscar and go to America. And she is a very loyal person. She also is so dedicated to her son. And so it's really fun to watch, because it is that gray area where you don't really know what she's going to do at first. And so what was that journey for you in kind of getting to explore that sort of test on a character?
I think one of the really grounding things about Agnes's experience in the series, strangely enough, because it wasn't perceptible in the beginning, at least to me, was a relationship with Zubak, because he really only is the other person representing the proletariat being thrown around in this situation, except that he's been harnessed as some sort of awful human weapon himself, and living with this self-flagellation and the repercussions of that. but she really feels for him. And I think in that between, she's very, very loyal to Elena, but she's loyal to her in a familial way. And that's been weaponized against her. She's had a child stolen, basically, and is co-parenting with somebody who's a little bit unstable. And that's hard to navigate. And so she's now trapped, but was always complicit, as they all are. They're all enablers of this madness. It felt very suffocating. It felt like it was a suffocating experience, which is strange because there was so much steam and so many air purifiers and so much talk about getting air and breath and people's smelly breath. It was a really fascinating experience.
Yeah. And Guillaume, I mean, your character is on this push for poetry and creating a poetry cultural center. Did you think that he had a genuine passion for poetry, or was it just the necessary posture of being married to a dictator and a leader?
When I first met Stephen, it was by Zoom, and with this casting director, Leo Davis, and Stephen said, so what do you think of the part? And then he said, but where are you? And I was directing Cenerentola at the opera. I said, I'm at the opera. He said, what are you doing at the opera? I said, I'm directing Cenerentola. And he just said, oh my God, an intellectual. And so, so I always thought that the poetry thing was added because of that. No, I think he generally think, either you do charity, either you do poetry. It's a bit like, for the consort, it was the only thing left for him to kind of have something, a hobby, or, do something just to get him out of his jacuzzi, I guess.
Other than feeding the population or basic things like that.
Well, he
that was his priority.
But it's funny because we all had a duality between loyalty to Elena and how to, save our skins from what's happening between this toxic encounter. So we all have this duality different in a different way, because actually I think Nicky is quite a bit of a masochist. I mean, he doesn't mind being her rug, doesn't mind at all, just as long as it's hers and just as long as he feels her. And I think it's quite touching at the same time. So why not poetry? Baudelaire, which is good, has the duality as well. It works.
And Will and Kate, I wanted to talk about Elena's intelligence as well, because, she studied as a doctor, and there are things that she says throughout the series where she is actually quite observational and astute, but also moments where the naivety takes over quite a lot as well. And so how did you kind of find those different levels of moments where you want her to feel quite intelligent and then moments where you maybe want to play it in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think she has quite a bit of self-knowledge in a way. I think she is afraid of showing it, or afraid of dropping that mask, as Kate said. But we get those moments, especially those moments, a few moments with Zubak, but especially down the mausoleum, where the mask drops and she kind of gets to tell herself via the remains of her father, kind of tells herself what she really thinks about herself or suspects about herself. And I see her as being quite intelligent, but placed in a situation that has become so isolated that it's hard for her to be told anything but yes. And I think that leads you to become not always the best, have the best judgment in the moment. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I always felt extremely grateful that there was an element to her backstory that was based on education and training and skill, because to give her something, a qualification, meant that I was always prevented from going really too far down the road of the absurd. Because there were these really terrific anchor points along the way for everything that she is. So yes, she's intelligent and she's a trained doctor and et cetera, but when the chips are down, she can just lean right into that sort of slightly unsavory, almost sexual side of herself, even how she dresses in this kind of slightly tacky gaudy way just to achieve her goal, or just to overthrow or overpower, or even sometimes overcome her own shit. But I always felt grateful for the sort of anchor point that her education really lent her, because it did mean that at the end of the day, she was irrefutably intelligent.
Yeah, and she has that, just to add, that kind of craven intelligence that a lot of very powerful people have, where she knows what people want. And oftentimes what she suspects people want is not particularly noble, but she knows, you're after this, aren't you? And I think she knows how to give people what she wants in a way, right?
Yeah. And her background and training makes certain things that she chooses to believe even more shocking, like with Oscar, the kid in it, where she's like, oh, we're all holistic in the palace now. He doesn't need his epilepsy medicine. And so when you have scenes like that and choices like that, does that just kind of really give you the barometer for like, this is how far down the rabbit hole she's gone at this point?
Well, yes, absolutely. And it's just... it just goes to show how staggeringly desperate she is in terms of her own well-being and illness and health and mental stability and fragility, that she can just immediately believe in the power of the potato. I mean, it's like, did she learn nothing?
She knows deep down that something's wrong. And she is right that something's wrong. It might not be something literally in the walls, but there's something in that place that is off, and she knows it. Yeah.
And for you, Andrea, when Elena makes that choice for Oscar, how does that kind of change the stakes for Agnes? Because she's kind of found her way to navigate through the day to day, and then that's a very different terrain to have to exist in.
Just vast and uncontrollable swathes of resentment and hatred bubble up, and I think Agnes no longer has any moral compass that she was tenuously linked to before. Sort of dissolves, and she can't help but try and preserve the person that she's living for, and so everything is directed toward that. And without going too far into whether that might be possible to escape or not, her effort at one point becomes only the preservation of the child. And I think that was very clear. It felt very clear at that moment. I'll not tell you where I started just utterly hating poor old Elena. but she gets pushed past a point, Agnes.
I also wanted to talk about the costumes in the series, because they're so brilliant, but they're also used so specifically to chart Elena's story. There's a point where she starts dressing very differently to herself. There's a moment where her and Zubek are wearing, exactly the same colors because they're very close to each other at that point. And so for Kate, Will, Jessica, and Stephen, I just wanted to ask about the collaboration with the costume designer and team on this show to really chart her journey.
Consolata, she's brilliant. I've worked with her for 25 years. She's absolutely brilliant. Go on, Kate. You talk about the costumes. You know far more than I do.
Okay. I love you.
Well, Consolata was extraordinary in that, because we were dealing with a fictional country, but it needed to feel like it was also believable. We were looking at huge numbers of different references, but we very specifically wanted it to be things that, that suited Kate, that you could move in, but that every time she put a costume on, she was sending a message. So the very simple one is, at one stage, she goes from being with the people and wearing a kind of denim smock to changing into what she would call good military, which is like a very tight jacket with the embroidery and stuff on it. So she has very clear ways of what she's thinking is reflected in what she's wearing that day. It's why they're always interested in what she's wearing, which we hear about in episode 1, is it's an indication to the rest of the players.
Consolata and Kate just picked up on this thing, right, that you just mentioned in the first episode. So the only thing I ever really wrote about clothes in the show that I felt really specific was that, what color dress is she wearing? Green. Green. They all know what that means, right?
Yeah.
So everything means something, down to the color, down to the hairstyle, everything. And Kate and Consolata picked up on that. And I mean, I think they could walk you through every scene and every outfit and say, here's why she's doing that today, because she knows who she's talking to in that scene, what she wants to convey. And that's all just their brilliant work.
We did have quite a lot of fun. But the other thing that we really lent into was not having to make these. Normally, I love to make that thing of kind of costumes looking like costumes. I love to make that disappear so they become clothes. These were costumes. These were heavily costumed. We lent into fabrics that you'd never normally see on screen, colors I've certainly never worn before. We really paid attention to that, looking at things like, well, what is their national dress, and being able to even play around with that. And yeah, how tight those clothes were at times. And I couldn't always necessarily move in them or sit down. But again, that's part of her. It's part of that. It's almost the sort of synthetic side of her as well as the synthetic side of the clothes. This sort of fakery that she had to often just lean into in order to feel more powerful. But actually, the fabrics themselves were cheap. There's something you can sort of feel it. But we did think about that. We would sit for ages going, this one. I mean, honestly, we'd go this one, yeah, this one. I mean, that's really sometimes how we would choose. And it was really fun. It was fun and very unexpected, actually, to have such a voice, really.
These costumes were so mesmerizing that after a time I took to doing shots of Kate just walking down the corridor so you could look at them properly. They were so incredible, so impressive, so varied.
And
joy.
On the opposite end of the spectrum for you, Andrea, you're really just wearing that kind of like smock dress.
What are you saying?
Oh, she's got an evening dress.
No, but I also love that in your performance, your character, with all the moving around, there's such a specific kind of like movement and walk that she has. When you put on an outfit like that, does that help you in terms of just the physicality of them as well?
Well, Consolata and I talked a lot about her being a ghost, a living ghost. And that only gets worse progressively. So just the complete want to disappear, total disconnection with anything that's external. And she hasn't thought about or looked in a reflective surface for many, many years. And she just knows what she has to do next. And she's been putting one foot in front of the other like that for years and years and years now. And she's seen this woman grow up, and she's grown up alongside her. And she's almost completely stripped of any sexuality, although she is having this relationship with the very nice Peter, actually. So there's a little bit of fun.
A little bit of shagging in cupboards.
And Guillaume, I also wanted to talk about Nicky's response when Zubak comes along, because he kind of instantly recognizes that there is a threat and that this is someone who's quite interested in his wife and creating a divide between them. And at the beginning, he kind of plays it a little bit more placid because he doesn't want to cause conflict and be the one to create an issue. And then he has to become a bit more forthright. So how did you want to look at the different ways that he responds to Zubak's presence?
Well, Matthias and Kate have such a powerful energy in real life, but even more in these characters. I felt like being in a cartoon between those two. I was like, oh God, how am I going to deal with these two? Because they're really, really very powerful. And I was, Nicky was stuck in his, perfect image and perfect, doing the job well. And suddenly this guy arrives and, literally throws the table. And so, and at the same time, I needed to convey the fact that I was used to her having those deliriums sometimes. It's not the first time. So I'm like, okay, I can deal with you, until he can't. But he realizes it's too late. But he thinks he can control him, and he's quite clever in a way. But these two were so powerful. I remember when it was written, Zubak sniffs and Elena notices it. So I thought it was going to be very discreet. And we were there at the table at breakfast and we were eating, and suddenly this guy, Matthias, just went like that. And I went, and my reaction apparently was as big as his, and it made him laugh. He had his mouth full of earth, and he just spat the whole thing everywhere. But they were very, very powerful, both of them. And so I was literally, sometimes I was trapped between, and at the same time we had these vulnerable moments, just the couple, whether I spoke French to her or some moments just trying to play, to be reassuring, because Nikki understands her weaknesses, her fragilities. He's there for that. And she allows him to be until she doesn't anymore because her love is stronger. It's more than attraction. At first it's attraction, but then it becomes really love with Zubak. And Nikki understands it too late. And the moment he understands it, the moment I understood it really was the last scene that I'm not going to tell you about. But I was so moved. I thought it was going to be a funny scene, the way it was written. And the way Kate did it, the way she answered Nikki, moved me so much that I left the scene and I arrived in front of Jess and I literally cried because suddenly she made me understand something so powerful about the woman, just women saying, you know, I fell in love. What the fuck do you want me to tell you? And Nikki and I understood that really at the last moment, really. It was very, very moving. Because it's the power of this complex story, isn't it? I mean, she's crazy, ambitious, nuts, whatever, but she's very endearing at the same time. That's the genius of what they all did, really. And I think that's the success of this show is there.
I'd also like to add, and I'm sure you, Stephen and Will would agree, what the cast brought to it was extraordinary. So the depth that they're talking about, when they talk about their characters, they brought all of this detail. There was enormous stuff in the writing, but these characters came to life in the most unexpectedly brilliant ways. And then when you put them in a cauldron together, they just exploded in the best way. And so that's really what's being reflected in the work.
We were lucky. I mean, Guillaume and I were very lucky because we were able to work extremely closely together on the fine mechanisms of Elena and Nikki's marriage. And it was important that you feel that all the time, exactly as Guillaume says. He is the only one who sees her fragility. He is the only one who knows what is going on behind the mask. And she feels the love of that as love, but also as scrutiny and a threat to her being able to block out the sound and just carry on and just do what she wants to do, needs to do. She becomes completely fixated with Zubak in spite of her love for Nikki. And Nikki's ability to call her out on all of her shit is so palpable to her that she even has to remove him so that he doesn't call her out, so that she can just go and have her fun. I mean, it's a phenomenal act of love as well on the part of Nikki that he relents and lets. He doesn't insist on staying. He lets her send him away. It's completely heartbreaking, and she misses him desperately. And I think hopefully you feel that too. You feel that sense of her saying to herself all the time, okay, no, maybe I shouldn't have done that. I do miss him really. And if only he were here.
It's as if, you know, the couple that has lasted so long and suddenly it's as if I've allowed her to put me in the place more of a brother than a husband. And if you let that go, it's over. And it's exactly what happens, I think. It's suddenly I've allowed that to happen. And of course, the other one is so sexual. I can't compete. I mean, look at the guy. It's like, I cannot compete. And so it was very, very funny and very touching to do, really. And it's true, we worked very closely together. That was fantastic. All of us. And we all had the same, we could understand each other with practically nothing. Just, you know, sometimes Stephen would go faster. And that was it. And the rhythm was we immediately understood what he meant. And Jess would just come and go, let's do it again. And just by saying that, it's like, yeah, of course, yeah, let's do it again. We didn't need to put so many words. We were really a brilliant team.
We're going to open up for questions shortly. But I also wanted to ask you, Kate, Will, and Jess and Stephen, for any of you who want to jump in on this. You know, it sounds like there was a very specific choice of, we need to make the audience fall in love with Elena a little bit, because you don't agree with a lot of what she's doing throughout the series. And yet you have this conflicted experience as a viewer in still wanting her to succeed at times. So how did you make sure that you found those touch points so that the audience would feel that connectivity to her?
You cast Kate.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
Oh God, I just knew I had to make her really, I mean, she just had to be multidimensional. And I'll be honest, it was an extraordinarily complicated process for me putting her together. And I was very, very scared I was going to fuck it up. It was terrifying. I mean, we had to make some punchy choices. And yeah, and also I lived in my own head with her for quite a while before even opening my mouth in front of anyone. And so the anxiety around the choices I was hoping to be able to make and whether or not people would agree, it was huge, really. I mean, actors on the whole do tend to be quite scared. Thank you for nodding. And you just have to kind of overcome that stuff. And you don't really talk about it. You don't really say, "Oh God, I'm scared." Those are not things that you really say, apart from quietly in corners to each other. Certainly in the case of my learned colleague right here, lots of whispering and fuck. So I definitely had moments of thinking to myself, "Shit, okay, I'm just going to have to really believe that this is okay." But giving her as many anchor points as I could, things that felt to me intrinsically feminine, intrinsically vulnerable. I just had to be brave about making those choices and shoving them in. Honestly, it was a case of kind of white knuckling it for a bit.
And how about for you in terms of the writing?
Yeah, I mean, what really helped in terms of, because originally when I early drafts of the script, it was kind of just drafts that I don't think anyone here has read. It was kind of just Elena and the kind of bureaucracy around her ministers, and it was fun, kind of a fun world. But it was it's hard without another character there to emotionally access Elena a bit, right? Because she's just sort of being dismissive to the ministers, and it's hard to get in there. And originally, that character of Zubak was just like a narrative device, almost like an audience avatar character. You enter the show through his eyes, he sees the palace, he gets a job, and then he kind of fades into the rest of the ensemble. And then I kind of realized, if you make it a bit more of, if we have this sort of what became this kind of strange toxic love story, you kind of get to see all these other dimensions to Elena's character. And in a way, it does become, I say, a toxic love story. And certainly it's not, The Notebook, but it is still a love story in a way. I mean, it's two people for little bits there, for glimmers, for kind of heartbreakingly brief little glimmers. They do what I think you're supposed to do in a healthy partnership, is make the person you're with feel like the best version of themselves, the strongest version. They make each other feel stronger. They find the little kind of deficiencies and the kind of the aching little chasms in there that they are insecure about, and they fill those chasms for each other. But they're both kind of broken in very different ways. And so, and also, he's kind of a product of the state that she created. So it's going to be impossible for them to ever be kind of equitable partners. But, and so telling that story aloud, I just try to focus on that. And that's kind of how you get into what would otherwise be a fairly forbidding presence, Elena. I think she becomes, certainly by the end of the series, you know exactly who she is. And I think it's quite possible to feel real emotional investment in her.
I love that answer. Unfortunately, we're getting the signal to wrap it up. Thank you for all of your wonderful questions in the room and on Zoom and all the pre-submitted questions that we were able to incorporate into the conversation. And I hope that you have a wonderful time watching the rest of the episodes if you haven't already. And thank you so much to all of you for sharing this wonderful show with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
very much.
Thank you very much.